Thank you, Margaret. Our speaker today is Timothy Connell. Tim was born and raised in Laverne, Minnesota, graduated in 1967 from St. John's University with a Bachelor of Arts degree, and in 1976 from William Mitchell College of Law with a Juris Doctor degree. After a decade of private practice, he was appointed as a judge in the 5th Judicial District by then Governor Rudy Perpich, where he served until his retirement in 2011. He was president of the Minnesota District Judges Association from 2001 to 2002 and has served on numerous statewide committees as a judge. He married a young woman he started dating his junior year of high school. Her sophomore year, Tim and Connie are on the cusp of celebrating 50 years of marriage this fall. Let me assure you that the phrase "he married over his head" doesn't even begin to do justice to how fortunate Tim is that Connie agreed to marry him. Tim and Connie have raised 3 children. The middle one, Pat, who is the husband of my wife's business partner, is seated at my table, lives in Edina. They have 8 grandchildren. One of them, Sam, is also seated at my table. Sam, like me, is not a native of Edina. Sam grew up in that faraway place called South Minneapolis. Often during the summer, but not often enough, you might find Sam, his sister, and his brother swimming to my delight in my pool. On a tangential note, Sam and Pat might have to leave early prior to the conclusion of today's meeting because Sam does this thing called school, where minor children actually leave their homes during the day on weekdays and spend hours with kids and non-related adults to advance their education. This trend is predicted to overtake the age-old method of Zooming rather quickly. Tim, as you will soon learn, has had not only an interesting legal career, but is a very talented storyteller, which, as those of you who trace some of your ancestral roots to the Emerald Island know, is par for the course, evidenced by that tiny civilization producing literary giants like Yeats, Shaw, Beckett, and Haney. Now that I have set the bar very, very high, please give a warm Rotary welcome to retired District Court Judge Timothy K. Connell.
Before I start, a couple of house cleaning items here. Sam just a minute ago leaned over his dad and said, "This is a lot better than school." We'll see if that holds, Sammy. I don't know about that. And where'd Jim go? Probably. Did he leave? Oh, okay. Well, that's too bad because I had two things for Jim. One, he's 1 year different. I was in kindergarten in 54, not 53, but we share similar experiences. And when he went through that, I was going to tell him, I'm really glad, if you're for the Chris Farley fans, that was a house down by the river and not a van. Okay, thank you. Then, last thing. Anybody here under 60 know who did that song Happy Together? Under 60. Anybody over 60 know? Ah, there you go. Okay. You had to qualify that, but that was in the wheelhouse when I was. Oh, okay. Good. He was correct about the overkicking my coverage on it with Connie, and that was a song that was kind of big when we were starting to date. I think sometime in the 60s there anyway. So that was interesting. Yeah, interesting journey. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey and kind of what went on. But again, a couple other things, because it kind of all relates to what's going on here. I'm the second of 10 kids. I know Margaret here said 9, and I think Jim said 8 or something like that. Well, so far I'm the top. Anybody beat that? Not here. Okay, different generation and different time. But anyway, oldest son, second of 10. My youngest sister was born when I was in college at St. John's. So that's kind of an interesting gap between the two. I was also 40 years ago right now, the Rotary president in Laverne, Minnesota. And I was the youngest, well, not the youngest, but I was the first son of a father who was also Rotary president. So we were the first ones in Laverne to ever be father and son, both president of Laverne Rotary. I had to resign from Rotary when I became a judge because I traveled a lot then and I just couldn't get to the meetings. And it also could cause some conflicts depending with the people, but we're going to talk a little bit about that anyway. Career-wise, just to broaden that a little bit, yeah, I did graduate from William Mitchell, now called Mitchell Hamlin, in 1976. I went back to Laverne to practice law, which is something my wife and I, who obviously is also a native of Laverne, said we would never do, is move back home. And what did we do? We moved back home. But it was an interesting time in that we were looking at that time. We had Pat's older sister who was born in October of my senior year at William Mitchell. She was about 8 months old in the summer then. And we said, you know, we're going to move to a smaller town. We just like that small town life and everything. And we were looking around different places, Fergus Falls, Faribault, places like that. And then an attorney in Laverne whose partner had died of cancer that summer called and said, I'd like to talk to you about that. And we did. And sure enough, we ended up back there. But anyway, that turned out to be not too bad a decision for me as well. Got back there in 1976. I'd taken the bar in July. And for those of you who are attorneys or are aware of what attorneys have to do, you go through the school and you graduate from law school, and then you have to take a bar. If you don't take the bar, if you don't pass the bar exam, you don't get to practice. Well, as I said, the partner of the guy I went back to was the county attorney. And in Rock County, which is the cornerstone of Minnesota, as they call it down there, we are the southwesternmost county in the state, bordering both Iowa and South Dakota, each of which the borders are about 15 miles from the town of Laverne. And we're 30 miles from Sioux Falls, which if you're going to live out state, that's a pretty good place to be because Sioux Falls is a very nice town. So we like living there. Anyway, I go back to Laverne and I start practicing or start the law career on August 1st, having taken the bar but not gotten the results. So myself and 4 other guys apply to be the county attorney, and in the local paper, and I'm going to tell you 2 stories about the local paper, maybe more, but this is the first one. So after the interview, the county commissioners come out and the paper decides to print this. They said, it has been decided that Tim Connell will be the county attorney if he passes the bar exam. So at this point, everybody in Rock County and that reads that paper knows that, okay, I wonder if he's going to pass or not, which I did. And the other interesting thing about that is, as you know, you're pretty green when you come out of there. I got the bar results in early October of that year. And in the last week of October, tried my first, what then was called rape case. Now it'd be called crim sex, but criminal sexual conduct. So within 3 weeks, and I remember standing there and I would be talking to the jury in my hands. I'd keep my hands back there so you couldn't see them going like this, you know. But anyway, kind of a baptism by fire there. Spent 11 years as the county attorney and in private practice because outstate those are part-time jobs generally. I don't know how part-time they are because they keep you pretty busy. But I did all of the trial stuff, the prosecution and things like that. And my partner at the time did a lot of the child support and family cases and things like that. So that came to be. After that period of time, and none of you would, I don't think, remember this name. If you do, good. But the judge that I practiced under was Gary Crippen. And Gary Crippen got appointed to the Court of Appeals after his career as a judge down there. And at some point before that, he called me in and told me he was going to do that. And he said, you need to apply for my job, which is, you know, that was interesting to me because I'd really never considered that was where I was going to go. It just didn't seem like one of those courses that was going to happen or one of those things that were going to go, but he got me interested in it and I applied and then ultimately went through the process to the extent, and I'm going into this with some of you may be attorneys and know this process a little bit, but for those that don't, it's maybe a little comforting for you to know that I really am a fan of the process of appointing judges in Minnesota, and not because I got appointed, but they have a fairly good system there where you have to apply and you go through this Judicial Selection Commission, and this commission meets and looks at the applications, and now they interview people and do all that, and then they come up with recommendations to the governor, and the governor generally 3 to 5 names, and the governor will then pick from those 3 to 5 names. We have had a couple governors over the years in each party that has gone off the reservation and appointed somebody else, but for the I mean, literally 95% of, maybe 98% of the judges appointed go through that selection and criteria. And for the most part, and well, I really believe this, for the most part, if you get through that selection commission, you're capable of doing the job. So from that standpoint, it is not a political appointment. I don't think it ever has been. I have known, you know, all the governors since Perpich. I think that every one of them have appointed people outside their own parties, you know, Tim Pawlenty and Tim's wife, Mary, was a judge, as you probably know. I don't know if she went through the selection commission or not, but Mary was a good friend. And actually, Connie and I got invited to the governor's mansion once when Tim was Tim was a governor, so that was kind of fun to do. But Poleni, Carlson, Perpich, Ventura was very independent. He went all over the board with who he appointed, and most of them did. They did it based on qualifications for the most part. So that's just something that I think people should know and should realize. Anyway, so I become a judge. A couple of, and I will tell you some of the stuff that will be kind of what are cute stories to me. I hope they ring a bell with you as well. But anyway, first time I ever went to court, I was appointed as the last county court judge in the state of Minnesota. Every judge in the state of Minnesota that's not an appellate judge is now a district court judge. So we all do the same thing. We all have the same responsibilities, and we all handle the same types of cases. Prior to that, they divided it by the district court judges who kind of did the big stuff, and the county court judges who didn't do that kind of stuff. So it's just one of those quirks of things that it happened to be that all the courts were unifying into district courts, but I was the last county court judge appointed, and within 60 days, that was unified as well. So I immediately became a district court judge. But anyway, it was in Slayton, which is about 50 miles away. So you have a court reporter that travels with you, or at least I did, because we're driving around out there all the time. Slayton, Wyndham, Laverne, Worthington, Pipestone, maybe up to Marshall occasionally. It just depends where conflicts exist and where you have to go. But I was chambered in Slayton, which means that was my designated office at the time. So it's about 50 miles. So I'm driving up there. I just remember it so clearly. My court reporter's riding with me, and I'm kind of tooling along. I'm saying, geez, I don't know. It seems like we're running a little late. And she just kind of turns to me and looks at me and says, I don't think they're starting without you. So I learned that. That's my one Slayton story. The other one, and Dan asked me to talk about the effects that courts can have on people's lives and some of the good stuff that comes to be. And, you know, you learn stuff from everything you do in the job. And the other one from Slayton that just still rings true to me is one of the first cases I had. And, you know, when I say first cases, first number of months, it wasn't number one case or two. But anyway, probably an old gentleman, I'm going to guess 75 to 80 years old, who got his first traffic ticket for something. I don't even remember what it was about, but his probably 60-year-old son is bringing him to court to help him get through the process. No attorneys or anything, you know, and that's an interesting part about being an outstate judge is we do a lot of stuff that don't involve attorneys, you know, or the people just kind of walk into court and you kind of deal with them. But you know, it starts out, and I don't know what I'm doing still, and he certainly doesn't know what he's doing, but he has this, and if there's a doctor, you can explain it to me, where the larynx was removed, and he's got one of these where, you know, where you can't really understand him too well, but we were working through it, and the son was there to help me. Long story short, ended up just really liking the guy as the hearing went on, but at the end of it, he said, I found him guilty, which quite honestly, if I'd had another year or two under my belt, I probably wouldn't. I just said, you know, you've been good guys, get out of here, you know. Well, and then a police officer like the young gentleman back here would be mad at me for dumping the case, but yeah, he would. See, he knows. And then, but anyway, I said, okay, I'm finding you guilty of this offense. What would you like me to do? As little as you can. And you know, it was a terrific learning experience for me, because that synopsizes the whole career. That's people who come to court. I mean, generally, most of them plead guilty. Most of them know that something's going to happen, and all they want is as little as you can. And I just have never forgotten that. Had some interesting things through the career, and I've told Dan if I start rambling too much, I'd be more than happy to be interrupted by him so he could bring me back on task. But a couple things I'd like to talk about, because they're just things that always were kind of a bamboo under the fingernail for me. At least this one was, and that was I just wrote this down: plea bargains and plea agreements. I have found that for the most part, and I'm talking again north of 90%, there's no such thing as a plea bargain. There is, and often used plea agreements. And the interesting thing about here, it comes into the thing of, and I'm sorry, what is your name? Mike. Mike will know this. Mike knows this. I know this. County attorneys know this. A lot of people know this. Comes in the sense of the relationship between all of the parties who are involved in these kind of decisions. You know, most things start with the police officer, Mike, or anybody else who decides he's got to write a ticket for something, or is going to write a ticket, or investigates a crime and brings that, and they bring that into the county attorney, and the county attorney then decides, how the charges are going to go. And, there's a lot of stuff in the news right now about county attorney charging decisions and the guy in Stillwater with the Brooklyn Center case and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, and then once it comes to court, obviously the judge decides, if those charges are valid or if they got to dump one or two of them, or if they're proper or not, the Chauvin case murder and the third that went out and then came back in and all this kind of stuff. Every one of those parties has a specific role. And, the police officer has their role, the prosecutor has their role, the judge has their role. You get people involved throughout the case, things like probation officers, family services, CD counselors, all of these people that have these facets of the case they become involved in. When things work the best, it's when everybody does what they're supposed to do and not worry what other people are doing. And when I was kidding, because I have obviously over those, as county attorney and judge, 35 years, spent a lot of time talking to police officers and talking to probation officers and everybody else. And, I kid about it. This is another kind of cute story. I'm coming home from Marshall one day, which is about 70 miles, and I'm on a back road and going a little faster than I probably should down that road because it's been a long day. It's about 8 o'clock at night, probably going about 10-15 over the speed limit because it's not a main highway and there's never cops up there. And the lights come on behind me all of a sudden, and I pull over and it's dark, and the police officer walks up to my window and he says, "Can I see your license, please?" And I hand him the license, and all I hear, he's got the flashlight, and all I hear is, "Oh crap." Except he didn't say crap. He said the word that would be like crap. And he hands me the license back and he says, "Slow down." I said, "Yeah, I will." And I get home and my wife says, "Oh, there you go again. You're getting that special treatment." And you got to know my wife to know that she was on pat vouch for this. And I said, "Well, that kind of cuts both ways. It could have, that officer did that. If it had been another officer, I could be in jail right now and you have no idea when you could see me." And, but anyway, that's just another one of the interesting stories. I'm bouncing here a little bit, but small town judging and small town life is really interesting. I was born and raised in Laverne. I mean, I lived there my whole life. I grew up there. I was not a perfect child by any means, and raised a little hell during my college years, and people knew that. And so then you come back in this role as a county attorney even, and it becomes a whole different deal. And then you get to be appointed judge after that, and these people who have known you since you're this high, all of a sudden are calling you judge and everything. About half of them, and the other half say, "Hey Tim, how's it going?" and all this kind of stuff. And everybody knows who you are. I mean, it's not like I moved into this town. They knew my family, they knew my brothers, they knew my sisters, and they know everything about you. So that becomes a really interesting proposition when you start seeing their family members in court and doing that. And I found the only way it works is that you just do your job. And again, I'm just saying that you do what you're supposed to do, and you do it the way you're supposed to do it. You don't pay any attention to who's what family, or whether it's a good family, a bad family, a poor family, a rich family, or whatever. You just do the job you're supposed to do. And I found that turned out to be at least pretty successful for me. I didn't have any issues that came up during that time. A judge is elected every 6 years. You see the names on the ballot and you check whoever the incumbent is for the most part. I'm sure that's what most people do. And the county attorney is elected every 4 years. So I went through, I think, 6 or 7 elections, never had an opponent. And Jim, or anybody else that runs for office, that's the way to go through an election, is without an opponent. So I don't know, you probably have one every time. But anyway, it's an interesting thing. But you see people in the grocery store, you see them on the street, you see them here and there and everywhere. And again, with my wife, an incident that occurred one 4th of July where she was haranguing me to take the kids, and we were going to go up to Hardwick, which is 8 miles north and has this little restaurant called the Green Lantern. And then we're going to go to about Leota, which is another 15 miles away, to watch fireworks. Great fireworks show, no doubt about that. I said, "I'm not going to Hardwick." "Oh, come on." I said, "Connie, there is no way that I'm not going to run into somebody who's at a DWI or somebody who's been in front of me. I mean, it's just one of those joints where those people are hanging out, and I said, it's going to happen." And as always happens, she wins the argument, and off we go to Hardwick with the kids. You remember this? Maybe not. Anyway. And in we go, and into the Green Lantern bar we walk. And I got from here to Dan And over here, Connell, you asshole. Merle Johnson, one of my frequent flyers, and another one of his buddies who's also a frequent flyer. And they said, and they're having a nice 4th of July. Let's put it that way. And they're not on probation or anything that way. So they're not doing anything, I guess, that they can't do other than they shouldn't be doing it. But all of a sudden, and then they just end up talking. And he said, I shouldn't have said that. I used to think you were, but you're really a pretty good guy, but this, when you're a small town judge, this is the stuff. And I've told Hennepin County judges this, I said, the anonymity you have is wonderful. Enjoy it, because there's nothing out there, that just doesn't happen. But the people of Laverne have treated me well. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple different cases I had, but one last story. And this made me a legend among my fellow judges. The local paper, which is the Rock County Star Herald, is 2 sections of paper, the news and the sports. And it's a small paper. It maybe totals 20 pages. But every once in a while, the editors and the publishers there get this bug going where they have to publish government salaries. I don't know if that happens up here, but they got to go on the editorial page, and this time they said, here are the 10 highest government salaries that you taxpayers are paying in Rock County. Want to know who number 1 was? Timothy K. Connell, district court judge. I don't even remember the amount, and I'm pretty sure that wouldn't hold anymore, but at that particular time it was. Now that doesn't seem too unusual until you go to the sports page, and the banner headline was Connell wins club championship. and they said, my fellow judges said, and you still get elected, huh? So that was interesting. Small town does not mean, though, that you don't deal with some things that are pretty interesting cases, and there's a few of them that just kind of stand out as you go along here. And I've actually, over my last few years, made a little bit of law here. Are there any lawyers in the room? Any family law? Any? Kramer v. Kramer, which is like the movie, only a different one. Case in Worthington where I threw out a prenup, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. I got reversed by the Court of Appeals, affirmed by the Supreme Court, and it was just one of those interesting cases that comes up. It's a farmer down there, and there's a great backstory to it, because where I am, you get to know the attorney. You know every attorney that comes in front of you, if they're from down there, because that's who's in there. So you know each of them, and there's a level of trust that gets built up that I'm not so sure gets built up in the cities, because you're just kind of bumping into everybody all the time. This was a farmer who had, and I'm just going to use a round figure of $3 million worth of assets and everything. And he's now married a woman that he pursued while she was married to somebody else, and that marriage broke up, and then he married her. And then he was just shocked that somehow she had found another guy that she was in a relationship with. So the divorce comes, and he's mad as all get out, of course. But I knew the 2 attorneys, and I talked to the attorneys, and you can do this if you talk to them. I talked to them in chambers before that, and I said, I've looked through this whole file. I've read all the pleadings. This is the first time they've been in court. And I said, I think there's something to be talked about here. With your permission, I'll talk to each of you individually about what I see in this file, and you can talk to your clients and see if we can get this resolved like right now. Yeah, they said that. They had faith in me in that and everything. So I talked to the woman's attorney first, and I said, I'm not trying to in any way demean your client or anything, but it seems to me that this is a cash deal. If she can get some money and just be done with this, and if it's somewhere where it helps her out, that she might be willing to do that. And he said, you're reading it correctly. And I said, assets are assets, and you never know how movable they are and everything else. So what if she gets $600,000-$700,000 out of this today, or within a reasonable amount of time, and just be done with it? And he said, I think she'd probably go for that. So I bring the husband's attorney, and I said, you got $3 million here. That's $1.5 million at 50%, and sure, some of it might be non-marital and all that, but it's still substantial. Tell your guy that if you'll pony up $600,000, I think we can get this case taken care of, And so he goes back, and then they both come in, and I looked at the husband's attorney. What'd he say? He said he'd rather lose everything he has than pay that blank a nickel. And the end story of that is sometimes wishes come true, because he's been in court ever since. And this was in 2010. I didn't handle the actual property divorce because I retired then. And I think the final decision, I know the attorney that was the wife's attorney told me this year he got paid out everything. And it basically cost him north of 2.5 million for everything that happened with attorney's fees and costs and everything else. And it's just one of those interesting things you see with people. And so that's one of them. The other one that was an interesting one is in Ray, what they call MDT, which is, I don't think she'd care, it's Marie Dawn Thorson. Marie was a lady who did not have a lot of money, and she ended up taking a prescription for a drug, not an illegal drug, but just something she needed to take, and changing like the 10 units to 20. She did that, so she forged that, and the county attorney charged her with forgery. This woman had no prior record, nothing else going on. She just said, well, I didn't know that I have the money, and I knew I would need more than that, so I forged it from 10 to 20. Charged her with a felony. It's one of those you get in pretrial conferences and stuff, come on. Let her plead down to something where it's a misdemeanor, and she does her whatever you want her to do, pays a fine, does whatever, and this thing goes away and it doesn't become permanent. No, it wouldn't do it. She ends up pleading guilty to it, and she comes in about 5 years later and asks me to expunge that. And the county attorney doesn't like that at all and says, you can't do that. You can't expunge that case. There's a procedure that's required and everything else. And the other attorney says, oh no, you can do it. And here's the authority for it and everything else. Well, again, this is getting up, toward the end of my career and everything. And I looked at the attorney and I said, you willing to fight hard for this one? Yeah. So I said, okay. I signed the order expunging the thing, and up it goes to the Court of Appeals, and then again, eventually to the Supreme Court. And I was reversed. Now, any legislators in here? Okay. As a result of that, though, the law got changed. And I told the attorney at the time, I said, you're probably going to get reversed on this. I probably don't have quite this broad of authority, even though I wouldn't mind having it. But I think if you take this up, they'll take a look at the law, and they did, and they reversed it. And expungement in Minnesota is now a much better process for people like that. In that 5 years, she had zero offenses. She had nothing. She had gone through nursing school, and that was the problem. She's trying to get her nursing certificate, and they wouldn't give it to her because of this offense on the record. So she needed that off the record in order to get it. And I think since that happened, I think she's been relatively and pretty successful about it. Time-wise, you want to leave time for questions? I've got others.
Tell one more quick story, then we'll have some questions.
Okay. I went 20 years. My career is 24 years and 3 or 4 months, something like that. 3 months. I went just about 20 years without having any murder cases. And then I had 2 within a year. And both of them were quite compelling. One of them was kind of interesting because it was, and you might remember because it made all the papers, the state park person in Rock County, Blue Mountain State Park, that got murdered at her job, 19 years old. And this is one of those where she was the only person on duty. And this happened probably around early 2000s, right in there. And just a beautiful young girl, and got her head bashed in with a rock that had been like a paperweight in there. And the supposition at this point, still supposition because nobody knows for sure, and the guy certainly didn't ever admit to it, was that a guy came into the office, saw that there was a cash register, there was nobody around. She was in the bathroom in the back, came out, saw it happening, and it ended up, getting her killed. But anyway, a couple interesting things about that case. One was that they didn't find the guy right away for like 5 or 6 years. And then they improved the ability of DNA to be tested. And so they kept running it through different states, and he was in prison in South Dakota, and the DNA match, boom. And there were like 3 different areas of DNA match in the office where they were found. And, no reason for him to be. In fact, when he was the first question, he said, I've never been to that park in my life. When you have 1, you can maybe explain it away. When you have 3 in 3 different locations, that becomes a little more difficult. Anyway, he was convicted, and the interesting thing about that, both my murder cases were first-degree murder. You don't have to worry about what Pete Cahill's worrying about now, is what do you do for a sentence? Because in first-degree murder, when that comes in, you just say, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. You're done. So you don't have to have all the, Peter's going to be getting all kinds of pre-sentence investigations and recommendations and, family input and all this kind of stuff. Now, in that, we did you still get to give the family impact statement and all that kind of stuff, but there is no question once you're convicted what the sentence is. The other one I had in Worthington was also first-degree murder, so the same, and both were guilty, both got that sentence. Okay.
Oh, there's going to be one question to correct myself. I'm assuming there's a case in your history where it was a young person did something wrong, and now their life is turned around.
Yeah, I had there's a lot more than one. There's a lot more. I'm gonna tell two because one is just so you know, you just can't believe what happens with people sometimes. One's a termination of parental rights case that I heard in Wyndham, and that was also early in my career. And this poor kid was just in a horrible state in terms of what was going on in school and everything. And family services gets in there in the home, and it ends up, I ordered his rights terminated, and I think he's doing okay now. I mean, you know, you don't follow him forever, but they got him out of that home and everything. But the one thing that I will never forget about that home is on the main floor, there was a family bathroom. And when family services came into the house, they said, that house just smelled terrible, you know, and they couldn't, it was dirty and it was filthy and it was cluttered and everything else. But the reason it smelled terrible is because the family bathroom, the pipe that went below was broken. So everything that went into that toilet went into the basement floor. You know, and that's the kind of conditions that kid was living in. So, you know, the ability to get him out of those conditions and hopefully give him a better shot was important. The second one involved obviously drug cases, and drug cases are really tough. I started the drug court in southwestern Minnesota, and it started because of a case I had where I was sentencing a guy to 36 months in prison on a drug charge. And you have to have a history to get 36 months, but his entire history was drug, addiction. And the day I was to sentence him, I never went out during lunch. My court reporter was nice enough to usually go out and grab something. I'd sign orders and get caught up and get ready for the afternoon calendar and everything. And during that time, I was reading something on CourtNet about a drug court graduation in Mankato and how wonderful this had been for this guy and the family and everything else. And I just went, you know, here I'm sentencing this guy to 36 months. So I called the district administrator and I said, you know, how come that guy has this wonderful outcome and I'm sending this guy to prison for 36 months? The guy says, you want to be a drug court judge? I said, I guess I do, you know. So I ended up doing that. And one of the first cases I had involved a meth house in Rock County. And we had a lot of them because of the South Dakota border there. This one wasn't on the border, but within 2 miles of the border either way, there were a lot of them that occurred out there. And the reason they did that is because, you know, it was on the edges of both law enforcement agencies. But once they figured out this was going on, both law enforcement agencies got involved. And the other thing is once they decided that pseudoephedrine could no longer be sold without your signature, and that ended the drug court houses for the most part where I am. Now the meth's still coming in from Mexico or wherever, but it ended that type of trailer house stuff. This house had to be burned after it was fumigated for meth. But anyway, it was a husband and wife. They come in and I gave this guy a really, really good sentence for, you know, what the amount of drugs and everything were, and actually his wife too. But probation and conditions and all this stuff, the wife didn't mean, she ended up going to prison. This guy, it is now at least 15 years later, and in my retirement, I volunteered to continue to be a drug court judge. So I go to a drug court graduation and he walks up to me and says, do you know who I am? And I said, no. He said, and he said his name, and he said, I have been involved in this for the last whatever number of years, 16 years. I've been an advocate for these people. I've been involved in treatment programs. I've done all this work. I went, that kind of stuff. That's nice. Okay, thanks. Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, sorry, it went on so long.
No, that was great. That was great. Oh my gosh, would love to hear even more stories because I'm sure you have a lot of them. So, but yes, we try to stay punctual here. So thank you everybody for coming today. Next week, we have actually a special guest. Happens to be my older brother, but he's going to come and talk to us and tell us what it was like running 5 different restaurants through the pandemic. And he's got some great stories and is a wonderful, wonderful speaker, Bob Kinsella. So please come back next week. Zoomers, zoom in next week or join us here in person at the Edina Country Club. And thank you all. God bless you. And remember, Rotary opens opportunity. All right.